podcast. I have actually heard about your name from a few Seattle CMOs I interviewed, and I'm sure you know a bunch of them already since it's a small community of people. So glad to see you here.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Small but growing community. I think Seattle's become a hotbed for technology as well. So glad
Right.
to hear we're talking about each other on these. So
And also, I think you all have a small meetup going on in the tech community, right? So if there are any marketing leaders who are interested, probably could join your small little community
yeah,
of.
there's a couple of communities that I've started, and we meet every so often, right? Once a quarter at least. So and it's good. You got to share best practices. Think about what's working, what's not working, and keep up with the trends. And it's always useful to meet up with them. So.
Awesome, awesome, awesome. Gautam, the key topic that I wanted to sort of pick your thoughts on is a lot around pipeline. So I want to start with that. And I see an interesting title that you have called revenue marketing. And I see that coming up in a few marketing leaders' this sort of function as well. Can you
Yeah.
start with what exactly that means? And we can sort of go in deeper about like how you drive rigor, etc. from there.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. So look, I mean, revenue marketing, just as the title suggests, it's marketing and it's focused on driving revenue.
Mm.
Ultimately, and I think that's the way marketing is right now, especially in this day and age. We're driving revenue. The North Star is revenue.
Right,
I think that the sort of the old way of thinking about it, and I'm saying old, it's maybe just controversial, but is to talk about it from a demand gen perspective. And I like to think that a full funnel marketer, has got to think about everything that leads to revenue, right? So I like to joke there's life beyond an MQL, right? So
right,
there's like those are vanity metrics. Some of them are still important. They're leading indicators and stuff, but the mindset is how can I drive revenue? The mindset is about pipeline and not just pipeline generation through MQLs and stuff, but there's a whole sort of world beyond pipeline
right,
generation, which is pipeline, progression, pipeline conversion into actual close one revenue. So I think it's for those reasons that and I think you see this elsewhere as well. There's a lot of focus on how this group ends up doing that, and the importance of calling it revenue is just to make it a point that hey, it's about ROI. It's about
right.
the mindset to drive revenue. That ultimately is the ownership around pipeline, and ultimately ARR growth is the North Star. So.
Right. And even expansion comes from your purview as well, right? If I'm correct.
Yeah, it's a full life cycle sort of journey, and customer marketing or post sales. There's obviously land, and then there's expand, and these days expansion is equally important, if not more important.
Exactly. Exactly. But one point, let's talk about pipeline creation piece, right?
Okay.
Or net new pipeline. Uh, who owns that piece in companies that you work with, or even now, for example, at CrowdStrike?
Yeah, I mean it's the ownership is has been something that's been consistent. I have to say, like it's a go-to-market function, right? So pipeline generation is we'd like to think it's a shared responsibility, right? So there's three or in some cases you can call four because SDRs are either part of sales or marketing in every company. But marketing generates pipeline, the partner team generates pipeline through the pipeline partner activities, and then of course sales generates pipeline as well. So that's what it is. And a lot of companies, it's that. There's obviously, investments in all three functions to be able to do that. But, it's a joint go-to-market responsibility. And that's how it works best. I feel like if it is joint responsibility, there's ownership and accountability, there's joint reporting around it. That's what makes sort of the engine hum, so to speak. And
Right.
pipeline, like I said, is always a loaded word, right? Because
Right.
pipeline is pipeline generation. Pipeline generation then leads to pipeline progression and then pipeline conversion. Now, different teams obviously take a bigger role in
Right.
each stage of that journey, but I think there's involvement in definitely in the marketing side in every stage of that journey as well. But a
Right.
big part of it is obviously pipeline generation.
Right. The reason why I asked the question, Gautam, is that, for example, in our company, obviously much smaller than CrowdStrike, right? The SDR team is to report into sales, and we have a separate marketing leader. And whenever we go into pipeline meetings, it just becomes like a lot of discussion around like who owns this piece, et cetera, et cetera. And just like there's no one single owner of that. So we moved the SDR team to marketing team, and now they are responsible for like any pipeline creation that comes from majority of the program, since the SDR is rolling into marketing, there's a clear division of work,
Yeah.
right?
And I
Uh,
think I've had it in my past experiences. I've had it in both places, right? And again, sometimes it's a function of where the company is in their journey.
right,
Sometimes it's a function of the leader. Sometimes it's a function of, how we're sort of looking at it. So a lot of those factors play into where the SDR team or the SDR or whatever MDR, BDR team sits. But ultimately, I think if this has to work well, it needs to be a joint go-to-market responsibility, and again, joint go-to-market reporting and going back to the basics. I mean, definitions of what it is, stages of pipeline, how do you advance pipeline, who's responsible for that. Once you have that cadence and the operating rigor in place, then reporting structures are I mean, less important than
right.
actual the process that's in place to drive and convert pipeline.
Right. So let's talk about that piece actually, the process and the operating rhythms that you have seen work very well. Like, how does this work since there is a cross-functional go-to-market responsibility that happens? Do you guys all meet once in a week, every quarter to review numbers, or like how does this all come to picture in an execution standpoint?
Yeah,
Uh, yeah.
it's a great question. I mean, look, so I've done it a few different ways in the past as well, but one of the first important steps is to, goal setting, right? So we got to figure out, we could take a step back and figure out what the goals are for the pipeline teams, right? The
Mm,
pipeline generation teams, whoever those teams might be. And those need to be well understood based on obviously every company has a product market fit that leads to what the target revenue is, revenue that gets translated into pipeline and so on and so forth. I mean, you know the deal on how that works. But ultimately, once you have what the targets and goals are for the teams, I think then it's a matter of what stage of the pipeline we're focusing on. I mean, so we have weekly meetings, for example. I've had it in the prior companies as well, where we talk about pipeline generation. Pipe generation is a big sort of focus for
right.
obviously any marketing organization, and this one is no different. How do we sort of focus on whether we're generating enough qualified pipeline, right?
And that meeting has primarily marketing team coming into picture, or both marketing, sales, partner marketing, everybody coming in sort of tandem, or is
It,
it?
it it's so partner marketing is obviously part of that. SDR should be part of that as well because we're talking about trying to create pipeline to generate sort of what we call qualified pipeline. So every
Right.
company has a qualified pipeline metric, right? That's
Right.
the qualified pipeline. It's so I think just looking at it week over week because you got to treat it like a business, and I think marketing is a business, so you got to treat your weekly goals, try and figure out what pipeline generation goals were and how did we do against that week. And if you kind of take a step back, right, if you're hitting those goals from a pipeline generation perspective, all is good. If you're not hitting those goals, then you go unpack layer by layer what's happening and where, right? So these are sort of the weekly rhythm of the business calls that we try and look at from a pipeline generation perspective to make sure that we're filling the pipe or the funnel appropriately. Then there's sort of a secondary sort of view of the world, which is, once we sort of create qualified pipeline, what's happening to that pipeline. I always say the pipeline you have is worth a lot more than the pipeline you're going to create. So we got to make sure that the pipeline is progressing and the pipeline is converting. And I think that's where a lot of the marketing team sometimes, takes a back seat, but we got to sort of figure out how the pipeline is actually progressing through the stages and where, if any, is the funnel leaky, right? Because
Mhm.
you could be leaking out those opportunities for X, Y, and Z reasons, and understanding why and at what stage will help you sort of address that. And then if everything's going per plan, there's pipeline conversion. So, a couple of my last companies as well, I started this a pipeline council meeting, right? So ultimately, pipe gen, there's a focus on that. Pipe progression, there's a focus on that. But how do you bring it all together? We do pipeline councils and talk about it on a monthly basis with the right people in the room to sort of look at it holistically.
Mm.
You're generating pipeline that's not converting, it's a problem. What's going on, right? Or if you're not generating enough pipeline, what's the problem? It's not progressing as quickly as we thought it was, then what's the problem? So it's actually fascinating and it's interesting if you sort of just follow the entire journey to close one and then beyond that as well in terms of sort of expansion pipeline. So and you got to leverage data, right? I mean, it's the answers are hidden in the data, and you got to sort of figure out why we're winning, what's happening, fix why we're losing. It's all in the data. But that's the rigor is, weekly. The rigor is monthly with different people, different sort of meetings. And then of course, a quarterly look back and a look forward. Like coverage is another interesting metric that you
Mhm.
have to sort of know. Like, do you have enough coverage for out quarters, right? Because the pipe you're generating now is moving to, at least for enterprise motion, is going to the out quarter. So do you have enough coverage? So we look at all of that stuff, right? Generation is one thing, coverage is another for an out quarter. But it's all related. You can't look at it in silo, which
Right.
which is the biggest problem if you start
Right.
doing that, and then it becomes like you said, right? Everybody's looking at it, hey, I've done my piece, but it's not translating to the outcome that we're looking
Right.
to drive. So that machine has to work, and you got to connect the dots.
Yeah. There used to be a couple of things that used to happen in these meetings for us, for them at least, when we come all together, that actual meeting becomes a place where folks start questioning the data. Hey, that data looks incorrect. Like, I don't agree with that. And that will take the whole meeting on its own. That used to happen. And second thing is, we all discuss, we see that we don't have enough pipeline, then people move on. There is no action items, there is no initiatives that sort of come to the picture in terms of what should we do next. So
Yeah.
any thoughts on how to sort of counter those things and keep folks accountable, right?
Yeah,
On
I mean, I think there's once you have enough data, sometimes there's this tendency, and it happens, to the best of people, is to come in and report the news,
right.
right? And it's like, you're reporting the news, but then what are we doing? We gotta create the news, of course, right?
Yeah.
That's what we're focused on. So get the insights and then drive the right sort of behavioral changes, tactical changes, but the insights have to drive that behavior. And then if there's clear accountability, like, I mean, there is clear accountability on which part of the funnel is not working. And so you have to have that data. You have to understand if it's a sales cycle time issue, if it's the average deal size is not what we think it is, if it's taking too long, to progress the opportunities, or they're leaking somewhere in some stage of the opportunities. So the diagnosis is important, but then you got to sort of, cure it and figure out what we can do differently. It could be that the pipeline is there, it's just not converting. It's a maybe shitty pipeline, right? Not the right ICP, right? How do you sort of make sure that that's happening? So I think those are all interrelated, but yeah, I mean, the bias to action is important so that we just don't look at the data, and any fixes
Yeah.
you make will affect future quarters, right? You're not going to be able to solve the issue for your in-quarter woes, so to speak, but it's important to kind of at least identify what it is and then move to go correct it.
Very helpful. Kind of one follow-up question on this topic. What are some common reasons where you've seen pipeline progression not meeting its goals, right? Like any like high-level themes you have seen across companies as to what could potentially go wrong once you have some flow coming in, but it's not progressing very well.
Yeah,
Uh,
I mean, I think, look, it's every company has their stages of pipeline. These days they're all fairly similar. But I think that the pain is sometimes the biggest thing that and the sales folks have the process they follow, right? There's MetPick, and there's a few other sort of ways of going about it. But ultimately it comes down to, is the pain big enough, strong enough, and
Great
have
point.
you sort of been able to convince them that the solution that you were presenting to them drives the right outcome? Nobody's buying products, they're buying solutions to their problem that they have and trying to drive to an outcome. And I think that's the nature of any deal, right? And any sort of B2B, B2C, whatever it is. So I think when that is not clear, that's sort of a big reason for it. And that's why there's so much sales discipline around, is a deal progressing? Who's the economic buyer? What's the pain that they have? Is it the right person, right? Because is the decision maker is not part of the conversation, then, no matter how well the pain is understood and how well the solution is understood, we're not talking to the right person. So sometimes it's that, and then you know, oftentimes, and again, depends on the size of the company, what the solution is, right? I worked for a company before this that we were creating the category, different problem. Whereas established category with a lot of sort of competitors, slightly different issue, right? You got to get mindshare, you got to figure some of that stuff out. So those are common things that you have to keep a tight check on, as you sort of progress. Timing, right? Budget, other things. We don't have the budget. Like the macro has been kind of softish, right? And everybody feels it. That This is sort of below the line or above the line. Do we have
Right.
the share of wallet that we can assign to this? Does the budget line item exist? So these
Not
are typical
cybersecurity,
things.
Gautam. Not cyber. I feel like cybersecurity has not had a downturn at all. You get like everybody, right? Like,
You're right, but I think that it's been so cybersecurity, we're blessed to be in the
right.
space like cybersecurity. Totally agree with that. And it's the bad guys are still out there, and it's the attackers and defenders are always going to be doing this. But I do think that there's still, their cybersecurity is crowded, right? It's a crowded space. And how do you sort of distill the signal from the noise when there's a lot of sort of other folks trying to solve the problem in a different way, or even tell you you have an issue when you really didn't know even that you had an issue? So I think that matters. And I think that's when you kind of have to like figure out, make sure, just tying it back to pipeline, that it is progressing and they
Right.
understand what you're doing because they've got a ton of vendors talking to them at the same time.
Yeah. Because on that point, you sort of brought up the concept of mindshare, markets being crowded, etc. It feels like every SaaS category has like a big set of players trying to capture mindshare of their buyers, right? And few of them stand out, few of them are still figuring out how to do that. Like I'm just curious to understand from your point of view, in a crowded market or a crowded category, how can a SaaS company or a SaaS marketer think about getting the mindshare of their buyers? What are like the high level principles that sort of go into that? And if there are any examples you can share from your experience, or even how do you try to do at CrowdStrike, for example, would also be helpful.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think it's a great question. We every situation is different. Let me
Right.
just start with that, right? And there is, and I'm sort of a big believer in this now, even, with CrowdStrike. There is no denying that brand has a huge part to play in the success of, and especially in a competitive B2B environment. So, look, I've been in companies, and I think you've seen my profile on LinkedIn and stuff. Smaller companies where we focus a little bit differently on what the need is for that company. If there's a market category that is established, who are the competitors? What are we trying to do? What's our go-to-market motion? And then how do we sort of drive mind share versus an established category, big space, big TAM, a lot of competitors. But, if you do it right, I mean, now, brand becomes a big differentiator to be able to grab mind share amongst your audience, right? And now there's studies and research that's been put out there that tells you, quantifying the sort of the tangible benefits of a brand. I'm sure you read this. It was, I don't know, McKinsey or Bain or somebody
Yeah. Yeah.
that talks about the day one list, right? So
Yeah.
any buying process, any buyer has a day one list, and then over 90% or some high number are actually ended up buying from that day one list, right? So how do we get to that day one list? I mean, brand has a lot to do with it. And if you do it right, the investment in brand ultimately helps drive, lowers your CAC, improves your retention.
High
Um,
ACV, right? Things like that.
yeah, yeah, and then some brands charge a premium on their product. I mean, all of that is the power of the brand, right? So there's so many benefits of that. But for me, like I said, I've had the opportunity to do a few different things in different companies, right? Smaller company, it's you have to start with just a clear articulation of what the brand is, right? What do you stand for? What do you do better than anybody else in that space? Right? If there is a space, if you're defining the space, you definitely have to do it. Then you got to tell that story, right? You got to tell that story through your executives. You got to tell that story through your key spokesperson, thought leadership, point of view, reiterating that point of view to get the mind share. And look, if you don't have a point of view, I mean, that's the first thing you got to do is create a point of view, or one will be created for you, right? Either way. Um, but the best part about some of this stuff and the things that work best in my past is storytelling via customers, right? I mean, you want to hear what everybody else is saying, but you want to hear from a customer's perspective. That's great. Then you kind of layer on that some partners. You leverage strategic partners to tell that story in a complementary way. And then you keep hammering that point home, get social proofs, right? I mean, work with the the influencers, so to speak, that the Gartners and the Forresters of the world, those are all tactics to, help create that justification, that create that market position, that point of view, and then, the brand separates you from the rest as well. So that's kind of the not the playbook, but I mean,
The high
it's some
level
of the
philosophy.
things that you've done or we've done, depending on the company and what they need in terms of how and when to leverage the brand. If you do it well, what the benefits are.
Great point, Atul. You mentioned about customer marketing, right? I think we were discussing the fact that you are instituting a customer marketing function at CrowdStrike, right? It's early, but you have some vision for how that could sort of go this year.
Mhm.
And typically, customer marketing in people's mind is all about case studies, customer stories, etc. What is sort of your philosophy about that in general to get that function?
Yeah, I mean, look, customer marketing is, I mean, we've had a customer marketing function at CrowdStrike for a while. I did the same thing in my last company and the one before that. It's it's just the level of focus and the discipline that one can put on customer marketing and the reasons for it is important, right?
Mm,
Because we just started saying, we're blessed in cyber. We've got, and obviously CrowdStrike is a great brand, great company, doing well. Um, we got to look at customers when you get to the point where you have that many customers and a lot of companies, even when you have, slightly less than obviously what this company has. A big part of your revenue comes from customers, right? Every company has that split of new logo versus
right.
expansion, and where's the revenue coming from? And I mean, that's reason enough to make sure that you've got a function that's focused on the customers. When you put the customer at the center of everything, not just
Right.
the buyer journey, but your customer journey, good things will happen. So this is no different. I mean, this is no different than a lot of folks are doing in companies, in other companies. I did this in the last company as well. Look, you got to start making sure that the journey beyond the sale, right? Closed one, then what happens?
Mm,
How long till the first upsell, cross-sell opportunity? You know, how long till they get value from what they've bought, right? Time to value is a metric, right? If they bought a whole bunch of stuff, how are they doing against the adoption of those products that they bought? Are they getting utility out of the products that they bought? So time to value is important, and then you can actually then create things beyond that. So having data, again, just going back to data around those customers and the customer data that we all gather, every company gathers, is super critical, right?
mm,
It'll help you identify your ideal candidates, number one. It'll help you focus on ones that have the high engagement, that have the high adoption, they're sort of like, using the products in the way that it was intended to. And then once you have that data, even NPS scores and engagement, right? Is the customer happy with what you're buying? So once you have that data, then you got to figure out and tailor campaigns. You create content. You use resources. People use ROI calculators these days and show the total impact of what other customers have been able to showcase and use that, right? You can get very targeted to like the high profile accounts, like high value accounts. You can use ABM specifically for
right.
that. Some companies, some products, some businesses have PLG motions, right? So that'll sort of inbuilt, expansion motions. But all of that, then you leverage advocacy. Of course, advocacy is like one of the most important things. You get social proof, you leverage advocacy, and then you sort of create these upsell, cross-sell moments for so like none of this stuff is rocket science, right? But it's stitching it together. The art and science of this is use the data that you can collect on the customer, right? And see what's happening in their world. We got to match and meet them where they're at in their journey, and then be able to sort of talk through and feed them the things that we're talking about. And we got like tons of resources, content, tools at our disposal, but how do you get it in the hands of the right person at the right time? And these days you got to sort of hyper personalize as well,
Right.
to be able to do that. So that's sort of the vision for a lot of what customer marketing does. It's the experience of the customer post-sale journey that comes together, right? As what we call customer marketing.
Very, very helpful because a lot of folks, including me, right? When we hear about customer marketing, we immediately don't think of them as a strategic function to help them get value of the product from after they come on board and also drive expansion. It's more about, at least in our mind, we think about like customer stories, case studies, social proof, etc. But that's one part of the whole job function and description. It's more about end to end the life cycle of the customer post sale and figuring out what are the moments to expand, what are the moments to add value to them, etc., etc. Advocacy being just one part of it,
I
right?
mean, it's 100% just one part, a very important part, but 100% just one part of it. And you cannot deny the importance of keeping that customer, retaining that customer, and in fact, growing that customer. That lifetime value number needs to continue to grow. So on day one, you have to start thinking about onboarding. You have to start thinking about in 90 days, what is the time to value? If it takes 6 months for a software to be implemented and starting to be used, that's a problem, right?
Right.
So all of those things are important. And B2B SaaS, of course, net retention rate, people talk about it all the time, churn and contraction, it's a business killer, right?
Right.
So why wouldn't folks focus on that? And I think a lot of B2B SaaS companies, regardless of cyber or not, are absolutely focusing on it. It's the right thing to do.
Right. This tactically, Gautam, on that example you just gave, right, where if the onboarding is 6 months, for example, whereas technically it should be 3 months, the way the customer marketing person can add value is, hey, can you put together a campaign to help them understand what are the other customers in a similar space doing in the product to get value? Is that how you would think about to cut the onboarding time tactically, right?
Yeah, and again, it depends on what the reason is, right?
Right.
So look, customer marketing and customer success in the sales organization should be one unit, right? So just like that's sort of their best
Right.
friends. What's
Right.
They know what's happening in the customer account. They know what's happening there. We call account management or whatever you want to call them, but calling them customer success. Their role is to help the customers utilize what they bought and make them successful. So if it's a product thing, it's a different tactic. If it's a utilization on something that they, sometimes you oversell them on something that they haven't been able to use or they don't know how to use or how.
Right.
So you cater to the need of the customer
Right.
based on what the issue is. And it could easily be educational. It could easily be educational content for them. It could easily be just onboarding videos that you can sort of put in place to walk them through how you set configurations and stuff. I'm giving examples from like, prior companies and stuff as well. Just these are things that are important once you understand, because you don't want it to become shelfware, right? That's not going to be good when it comes time for
Right.
renewals and stuff. So
Make this sort of. Well,
yeah.
what are some of the early AI use cases you are excited about in general?
I mean, look, what's a podcast without AI?
Whenever there's a lot of chat about AI, I tend to stay away from it. But since you obviously are in the important role at CrowdStrike, I thought I'll check with you
Yeah,
anyway.
I mean, AI it's again one of those things that you can't go 5 minutes without talking about it. You can't like not talk about it with any different function right now.
Right.
So, and actually, it's great. It is to me a little bit of an equalizer, right?
Mm.
So, because everybody's starting to use it. I think, last year, and every company is doing this. We did it, I did it in past companies as well. We've been tinkering with it for a while.
Use, yeah.
And I think this is the year probably where I believe that it's gonna sort of go from like experimentation to some formal big investments. And I think, it's gonna be no different for a lot of companies out there. We've experimented with it in my last company for sure for the last 2, 3 years.
What use cases, Gautam, is it primarily content side?
So the first ones are always content, right? So where marketing started, and again, you tell me you've spoken to a ton of CMOs in this, but the easiest one that the folks are using it for is for content generation, right? So AI generated sort of long form report, short form. I use it for it's easier than ever for me to do a first draft of anything.
Right.
The
Right.
time to do it is this, but then what it's turning into is that there's a lot of trash out there in terms
Right.
of quality over quantity is going to be very important. So the human element to augment what AI is generating is going to become ever so important. Market research, right? Another use case that we use it for. You can kind of give it two web copies and say, hey,
Right.
do the comparison and tell me about the positioning.
Right.
You can do that today, and you've used it before. So So content generation, market research
Translation,
we've done,
right?
predictive analytics, right?
Pretty
I'm excited about some of that stuff because we just spent like, I don't know, 10 minutes, 5 minutes talking about pipeline. It'll tell you, right? These days there's a lot of these tools that tell you this, but you can apply AI to it and it'll tell you sort of the accuracy of your out quarter pipeline and sort of the efficacy of your in quarter pipeline,
right.
right? So you can use that. There's tools for that. There's tools to improve productivity, I think, that are being implemented more and more often. SDRs, we talked about SDRs in the beginning. There's like, how do you sort of templatize email templates, the outreaches, the sequences that they're putting together? There's what you call it, sales lofts and outreaches of the world are doing that. So I think some of that stuff I will see will continue to be used. It'll probably put it on a little bit of steroids, so to speak, to be able to do that. But that's what I think is going to happen. It has gone from like the peak of inflated expectations down to like,
Real
okay,
use cases,
now we
right?
got to actually use it, and more importantly, we drive the outcomes that we think we can drive, and getting this stuff in motion with the right outcome at the right price point. Some of these things that folks are putting out there, agents and whatnot, are going to get expensive as well. So
Right. Right.
I think that to me is it'll go beyond, and some of these use cases I mentioned are some examples. There's obviously capability
Yeah.
to do more than that, but these are sort of ones that I know I've played around with in my past, still playing around with that right now. We're actively using a few of these to do the things that I was talking about, right? So, and why not? I mean, it's there, it's powerful, but it is, you got to sort of make sure that you use it in the right way. Otherwise, as with anything, your mileage may vary, right? It's as good as what you do and what inputs you give it, and so on and so forth.
Yeah. There is this whole narrative because I'm going around the fact that, hey, a lot of services dollars can be replaced by software, through AI, et cetera, right? And agencies feel a little threatened because of the fact that if they're doing a lot of services, they could reduce their wallet of share. Are you seeing that in action, or is it still too early?
I mean, I mean, there's also schools of thought that, okay, SDR organizations, right, will just have these agents and they'll be just doing it. So we're not there yet, right?
Right.
And I don't think there's going to ever be, it is sort of coexisting and using it to get more efficiencies at
Right.
scale, right? That's sort of the first
Current phase, right?
frontier of
Right.
this, right? And we're still in that, right? We're trying to
Yeah.
get more productivity, and boards are asking about it, right? They want to know. My last board asked about it. What are we doing to drive more efficiency
Right.
in the marketing function? What are we doing to drive more efficiency in sales ops? Big sort of consumer of AI. SDR, are we going to keep sort of, what tools are we using to help productivity of the SDR? So it's been those kinds of things that I think are happening, and it should be happening. And I think people are actually showing more efficiencies, um, in by using this stuff. So it's not I don't think this sort of first wave or whichever wave we're in right now is about that. It's about actually the adoption and showing efficiencies.
Very helpful. And last question from me, Gautam. Obviously, you've been CMO, you've sort of done multiple different roles across different companies. So what have you learned in general, for someone who wants to become a CMO someday, right? Like, how should they think about their career? Should they plan in any way to get there eventually? Sort of what's your philosophy there?
I mean, look, everybody gets there in their own way, and
Right.
everybody has a very unique journey and stuff. The thing that I think I would say is it's a great role to have, right? In terms of, and I might be biased, it's the broadest view of the business, in a company.
Right.
And I don't know how many times in a day a CMO would have to change context to talk about one thing versus, product marketing and SEO and demand gen and this, that, and the other. So it's just like it's and CMOs have a seat at the table, which is great. I do think that, what I would recommend, folks that are aspiring to be, I want them to think like business owners coming
Yeah.
from a marketing background, right?
That's what I found, Gautam, about like best CMOs who have
Yeah.
worked. They always think business first and then marketing second. They just have a good business point of view about things.
It is, and then if you align yourself to the business, right, your marketing strategy, falls in place, and you know that everything you're doing is driving the business forward. It's a revenue driving
Right.
function. Don't let anybody say anything otherwise. So, and the other thing which I think is also important. So obviously being a business owner, sometimes because the function has evolved in the last 20 years, right, that at least I've been doing this, you're stepping out of your swim lane, and it's okay because you need to be able to own and be accountable and go drive the business. I think
Right.
there's folks that need to understand that it's okay to step out of your swim lane, to be able to sort of do the entirety of the business. We just started the call talking about pipeline. I mean, it's not just
Right.
about MQLs. It's not just about pipeline generation if that's not going anywhere, right? So it is that the confidence and the wherewithal and the ability to sort of take a strategic stance in the executive team and be able to drive things forward holistically, I think would be my wish. And I think a lot of CMOs obviously out there are already doing it. Data, they're using data. Data is the new currency. It always has been. It's not the new currency, but use data, because without that, it's just an opinion. So those are things that I would think would be important and I'm sure you've seen and heard a lot of this stuff
Yeah.
from others.
Awesome. Gautam, this has been very, very helpful. Thank you so much for taking the time and doing this. And thanks for your transparency as well.
Yeah, you bet, man. Thanks for having me, and have a good day.